Hi everyone, Nick and I are here today with Beth Karas. We are very excited to talk to you. Many of you know Beth from Court TV. She now runs her own website, Karas on Crime. Tell us about that, Beth.
Well, I launched my website, Lisa, by the way, thank you, Lisa and Nick, for inviting me today. I launched my website in October 2014 in order to cover Jodi Arias' retrial because the judge was banning cameras. So I thought, well, why don't I just go there and blog from the courtroom, basically log the trial live. It's kind of like tweeting from the courtroom, which many people were doing, except that people could come home at the end of the day and they could just read the entire day from morning to the end of the day. And then I would record videos at the end of the day answering members' questions. And this is a subscription site, by the way. I got photos and documents. And so it was a lot of fun for the 4 months or so that I was there. You know, after Jodi Arias, it's a little more challenging to keep up content because I'm not, there aren't any big trials going on right now, so I'm not streaming trials on the site, but it's still a place to come for podcasts and videos, legal analysis that I do. Sometimes I go back in time and tell stories of my old Court TV days or something that happened at a trial. I have a little book corner where I feature books that I've read that are justice related, and I try to get interviews with authors and crime victims and convicted felons and exonerees and all kinds of folks who are in the criminal justice system in someplace. So anyway, it's been exciting, and it's been a vertical learning curve for me, I must say.
So Beth, just for the South Africans amongst us, obviously in the minority, but not everyone knows about you. You were yourself in the law profession for quite a long time, 8 years as an assistant DA in New York, right?
Right. I was a prosecutor in Manhattan, in New York City, for 8 years, from 1986 to 1994. Then I went into television. But during my 8 years, not to name drop or anything, but I worked with the former governor of New York. He was attorney general, then governor, and then his name is Eliot Spitzer. And then he fell from grace when it was discovered that he had been patronizing prostitutes. Anyway, Elliot and I had started together. He was a few years ahead of me in terms of his law education. He was my supervisor at one point when I was doing racketeering cases, and John F. Kennedy Jr., myself, wow, 4 others were in this little boutique unit in the office. So I worked with JFK Jr. for about a year in that unit, maybe a little bit more. Around the same
time. How did you refer to him? Like, did you say JFK Jr. or what sort of name did you call him?
I just address him as John, and I found him to be a very, very humble, very approachable person, lovely to talk to. He helped me on a family matter because his uncle, Ted, was a senator in my home state of Massachusetts, and I needed some help with a brother of mine who was disabled and had special housing, and he got right on the phone and called his uncle for me. So, I was always very grateful to him. And I didn't really socialize with him, although I went to a tattoo parlor with him once.
Wow.
Okay, so Beth, you became a crime reporter in '94. Did you cover O.J. Simpson?
Well, it's an interesting story. I covered O.J.'s later trials, which is a road rage and then the Las Vegas robbery. I covered Simpson's murder case only from the home base because, and you have to just give me a second to tell this story. I resigned from the Manhattan DA's office by a letter on May 10th, 1994, telling my boss that my last day would be June 17th. I gave him 6 weeks to reassign, or 5 weeks to reassign my cases, and I told Court TV I'd start on June 24th. Who knew what was going to happen between those dates? So I'm home, very last day of work, with another friend of mine, another assistant DA who went on to become a federal prosecutor in New York. We're sitting on my couch, I'm decompressing, and we're watching the NBA playoffs, and all of a sudden this white Ford Bronco comes up on the television, and so he points to the TV. He said, "That's your future." So indeed, 10 days later, I'm walking into a newsroom where everyone's walking around saying, "Did OJ do it or didn't he do it?" And I'm thinking, the prosecutor I am, of course he did it, and to this day I believe that he did it. He got lucky. Anyway, I wasn't assigned OJ because I was brand new to television. I had to learn it. So I was teaching people about DNA evidence and doing other things during the trial behind the scenes.
What's kind of interesting, I'm not sure where I heard it the first time. It may have been from Lisa, but I think we got it from OJ Made in America, where they were just saying one of the reasons why that Bronco chase was so damn slow was because OJ wanted to hear the outcome of the NBA while they were driving. You know, he wanted to hear it on the radio, not be arrested, or in other words, that's why they were going so slowly. Crazy, huh?
You know, that's as good an explanation as any. I've never heard that, Nick, but I got to tell you, I recently watched the ESPN 5-part documentary. It was fabulous. I mean, I didn't watch the FX movie that was a drama, even though I was told it was quite good. But the documentary, I learned a lot, and I found it so well told, so well put together and edited. Now, I don't recall that in the documentary, that explanation for why he was driving so slowly. Could be. I mean, then he goes home anyway. I mean, it was the weirdest, most surreal Bronco chase, because it was hardly a chase in the traditional sense of the word.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
one of the things
anyway, I think we should. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, we've got a little bit of a delay, but one of the things we wanted to ask you about is we want to talk about Oscar Pistorius as well. You know, we've been covering both the OJ case and the Oscar Pistorius case, and it's interesting to get your thoughts on both. With both cases, they've both been called the trial of the century from two different countries. You know, but I have to say, and I want to get your impression on this, as far as Oscar being the trial of the century in South Africa, I'm not quite sure it actually stacked up to that. What are your thoughts on it? 'Cause you followed it from the beginning.
Well, there are some interesting parallels to be drawn between the two cases. Both of them killed a lover or wife or what, girlfriend, wife, so a female, character, and it was also a very, bloody scene. One a gun, one a knife. And they were both huge athletes in their countries. So I think from South Africa standards, and I've not been to South Africa, although I must go because I understand it's a gorgeous country, that really was a trial of the century for South Africans. It was televised. This was their huge star who couldn't have fallen farther, right? I mean, look what he has become. And this was somebody who rose from this horrible disability that he had to be able to run with able-bodied people and compete. And he was a little too trigger happy, a little too cocky, right? So it seems like it was an incident waiting to happen from what I know about Oscar Pistorius' history with guns.
Yeah, it was. It definitely was.
Well, I would agree with Beth there. I mean, the only reason I'm able to say this with any sort of context and perspective was because we wrote about O.J. Simpson, and so we were looking at a lot of those court days, the days of the verdict, on things like O.J. Made in America and so on, where we actually see the crowds and so on, and going from that and sort of investigating that, interrogating that, to the Oscar trial and these small little huddles of media, which is, for South Africa it's huge, but for America it's tiny. It doesn't even compare to the Jodi Arias trial, So I think you're absolutely right. For us, it's the trial of the century. For the rest of the world, it's like a little category in a drawer of the Jodi Arias trial. It's just a small little sort of thing. And I don't know what you think, Beth, but sorry, but the case itself, not to diminish what happened to Reeva Steenkamp, but the circumstances, one accused and one victim in a bathroom, and that's really it. I mean, if you compare it to the Jodi Arias case, the premeditation involved there, the preparation, and then everything that happened afterwards, the length of the case as well. It's kind of a small case, and one would think open and shut, quite a simple, small case, wouldn't you say?
Well, when you have a lot of money, you can buy really good defense lawyers who are going to turn over every single little stone in the case, and they are going to create reasonable doubt, or try to, and make the best arguments they can. So Oscar Pistorius was well situated to put up a defense that some thought, made a little bit of sense. His case was Jodi Arias ultimately did assert self-defense. So they're both saying that they were defending themselves, but Arias had so much premeditation. It does appear that this was an argument between Pistorius, right, and Reeva. He didn't plan to kill her. Nonetheless, it can be murder even if you're acting out of the heat of the moment when you should have known better and had time to reflect on what was happening. So, I never quite bought his story, by the way, and I was surprised when the trial judge had given him the lower level of homicide as a conviction, culpable homicide. And your system is so different in South Africa that on appeal, convict him of a higher crime.
You don't even have dolus eventualis. You have second-degree murder, right?
Right. And here in the United States, if an appellate court says there was some error at the trial level, it gets sent back for a retrial. But for you, and we saw this happening in Amanda Knox in Italy, so other justice systems allow an appellate court to sort of act as the juror, but you don't have juries the way we do. So anyway, it's a totally different system and not something I completely understand, but obviously respect. So, you're asking me a question about comparing the two. One is premeditated and one was acting in the heat of the moment, but he had time when he was running down that hall with a gun in his hand, I believe, knowing full well that she had just run down to the bathroom and locked herself in there, and he was angry with her, and he just fired, not facing her. He's facing a door. He's not maybe totally appreciating what he was doing, but it's his bathroom. He knows the small dimensions. He knows that guns are deadly, and he fires 4 times. It's just all so tragic. Can I ask you a question? Was it established for sure because of the height of the bullet holes in the door that he was on his stumps, or did he have his legs on?
He was on his stumps. They did, Mangana, who was the ballistics expert, who was, I thought, probably the best witness in the case from an expert perspective, did determine from measurements and recreation that he was on his stumps when he shot.
So he's able.
But they did think because the angle of the bullets was slightly downwards, that they thought, he must have been on his legs, which was a kind of a natural, intuitive error to make. You wouldn't have expected that a downward angle at that height would have been him on his stumps, but it ended up being like that. Yeah.
You know what's important to mention?
It's a slight downward angle.
For her to get the wound to her head, she was clearly doubled over, folded over, so coming
that
low.
was the last bullet. The first bullet was to her hip while she was standing. But Beth, before I forget, I just want to ask you a question. If you were the prosecutor, right? If this was your case and you were the prosecutor, Lisa and I and certain other people believe it was premeditated murder from the perspective of having an argument and other things happening. But what about just in the confines of the toilet? If you take something as simple as Oscar fires a shot through the door, which hits her in the hip, he misses with a second bullet, and in that period of time between the first bullet and her being struck by the last 2 bullets, Reeva's got time to put her hands on her head. Now I don't know what the law says, but if you think about it from the perspective of the deceased, if you think about it from the perspective of Reeva who died, if she has time enough to go into a defensive posture, can't one argue just on the basis of that is premeditated murder, in the sense of you've fired 1 bullet, the time that it's taking you to fire again is long enough, if it's long enough for someone to react and go into defensive posture.
It's more time to reflect. The definition of premeditation is having time to reflect on your actions, and that's not really defined how much time you need. I suppose technically, but I do want to say that there's another theory of murder. Premeditation is usually first degree, second degree murder can be, in many states have this theory in the United States, depraved heart or depraved indifference to human life. Yeah. So independent of your intent to kill or premeditation, it's the equal level of intent to kill, though, and premeditation is a little bit higher. You can act with such a depraved indifference to human life, with such a depraved heart, meaning you're firing into a small area through a door, knowing there's a person there, and you're firing several times. That is second-degree murder without having to worry about proving intent or premeditation.
Yeah. The other thing which goes into that same argument is the last shot was the most lethal. Now is that blind luck from it's not a very good term to use, but was that just luck, from the shooter's perspective, or was that literally tracking a target, which again comes back to this idea of, wasn't it meditated? In other words, because Oscar was someone who was trained as a shooter, and something that I think is important to establish is, you've got to imagine that Oscar's, in the ITV interview, you see Oscar saying, the prosecution accused me of bashing the door down with a cricket bat, and then he says, well, I can barely even stand, let alone, be able to swing a bat. But then what he doesn't say is that he did actually fire all four of those shots while on his stumps, and when he reenacted it, he basically showed how he needed to support himself with one hand in order to fire. Now, if you think of it just in that context, is you've got a guy on an unstable platform in terms of his legs, but he's got to stabilize himself with another hand, and 3 of the shots he's firing are accurate out of 4. You know what I mean? And there was definitely a pause between the first shot and the last. Could he have lost his balance slightly after the first shot? I'm just saying. Yeah.
The direction of the bullets could be because he's losing his balance, but the fact that he had to prop himself in order not to fall so he could fire definitely hurts him in this case, right? I mean, that definitely hurts his argument in all ways. I mean, I don't know if it really supports premeditation. I haven't studied South African law, but before the trial, I did order a book from South Africa on your law, but then I ended up not covering the trial for work. So I don't know. Maybe you can tell me if that does support premeditation under South African law. I can see the best argument being made under U.S. law in most states would be a depraved heart, second degree, not first degree. I mean, even though technically you could argue premeditation between shots, really these shots were pretty close in time. I mean, maybe you're talking seconds, and we're not talking about minutes here.
Yeah. What did you think? I want to know what you thought about Harry Nell. Nick, you had a chance to meet him while you were at the sentencing hearing last week, but I'm curious, Beth, what did you think about him? I mean, obviously their style is a little bit different. They're presenting to a judge, not a jury, so it's not as theatrical as we see here in the States, but did you feel like he actually proved his case?
Yeah, you're talking about the prosecutor?
Yes, Harry Nell, yep.
From what I saw, and I did see a large part of the trial, I thought that they did a very good job. Mm-hmm. But Pistorius has good attorneys too. I've seen great defense attorneys dismantle prosecutions and just nitpick, and it works with juries. It's different when you're convincing a judge, but it worked with this judge too. As far as I'm concerned, that initial verdict was a big win for the defense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it was absolutely. Can
I ask you in that context, because we also felt that ultimately Oscar's been found guilty of murdering an intruder, not intentionally murdering Reeva Steenkamp. So again, if you were the prosecutor here, what do you think Harry Nell did wrong or could have done better to have addressed the actual crime?
I kind of feel hesitant to comment on that only because I didn't see everything. But you're sure that the conviction now is murder of an intruder? Just because Oscar says it was an intruder doesn't mean that it was.
Yeah.
I mean,
No, for sure. Look, the in terms of the law, obviously what we say is different to that, but in terms of the merits of the law, Oscar's guilty of murdering an intruder, not murdering Reeva, even though he did kill Reeva. And that's kind of also what his argument was on ITV. We thought that I was actually busy writing a book while the trial was going on, so I didn't have the benefit of hindsight. But what the judge did mention ultimately was, she said, if you're going to say there's an argument, if you're gonna say X, Y, Z, then you've got to give me a motive. Intention, obviously, an intention is supposed to be sufficient, but if you're going to argue murder, you've really got to provide motive. Not that it's essential, but it's certainly useful for psychology.
That's interesting.
And I thought that was.
Yeah.
Motive is never an element of the crime in the United States, unless you're charged with a hate crime, where you have to, the prosecution has to prove you're motivated by somebody's gender or religion or race or something. But motive, it's good to show, but you try to show it if you're a prosecutor, to give the jury, the trier of fact, something to really sink their teeth into, but it is not a requirement. So for the judge,
but
give me a motive.
Beth, you look at O.J. Simpson as well. What's so frustrating with that case is, and I think Lisa, you'll agree, is all that sort of testimony about the previous incidences of domestic violence to Nicole Simpson. Like this absolute, there wasn't not enough evidence. It was just all over the place. And yet, it's almost like in a way, it's obviously easy to say now, but in a way, it's almost like the prosecution dropped the ball in connecting that to a motive. Do you know what I mean? The impression I got from watching O.J. Made in America was that at some point the jury just switched off. They got tired of seeing the same images. Wasn't that what we said?
Well, first of all, the judge kept out a lot of the domestic violence from the jury. They heard some of it, but not all of it. And they keep it out. Judges will keep stuff like that out because they don't want the jury to convict based on the past. They got to look at the evidence in the courtroom in this one case. It is relevant. I used to argue, why are you keeping this out on the defendant's past? Why should the defendant benefit from being an expert at this kind of crime or having done something very close to it a lot, and then the jury doesn't get to hear it? But in any event, the jury didn't hear everything about him. But what lost it for the prosecution was the race card, right? It was Mark Fuhrman, and Fuhrman just should have admitted that he had used the N-word, the racial epithet, the horrible word. He should have admitted he used it, and then it would have hurt the prosecution case, but those tapes of him from Laura McKinney, where he was saying that over and over again, wouldn't have come into evidence. So that's what really lost it for them, I think.
Yeah,
and I think at least one of the jurors seemed that maybe she changed her opinion today about O.J. Simpson. At least that seemed what I seem to recall from the series.
Some of them have, and some of them flat out admit that they convicted because of they don't. Some of them don't really seem to feel badly about it. It's kind of interesting and disturbing. But Beth, you've seen the pictures of Reeva, all of them that were released at Barry Steenkamp's request. And so that's something that Nick and I have been talking about recently on our blog. There's a couple things I want to talk to you about in relation to that. The thing that we found really interesting is that, I think a lot of people feel like Oscar has been dishonest, but I don't think that they've had a full conversation about how dishonest, as far as what he did to the crime scene after the fact. Those pictures that we've seen recently, Nick and I feel pretty strongly really support the fact that that scene was cleaned up. And we used an example of Nicole Brown Simpson as she was found at her crime scene to talk about how much blood is realistic in a crime like this. When you look at the totality of the scene, how much Oscar moved, who he called, what he did, I think that is hugely indicative of the fact that this had nothing to do with an accident and him trying to save her. when you look at Reeva's head, there's no way anybody thought she was alive after that shot. So I want to know what you think about that.
Well, first of all, in comparing the two crime scenes, I do want to point out, that when Nicole Brown Simpson's throat slit and her head almost cut off, at least the knife wound goes into her spinal cord, there's going to be more blood. And she was there for a longer period. She bled out, right? I mean, she's not found for hours, as opposed to Reeva, she has several wounds and she's bleeding a lot. She's that gaping head wound, and head wounds bleed a lot, but it wasn't her throat. And he also gets her within minutes out of the bathroom. Her face being clean does seem to indicate it's been wiped off. But don't forget, I mean, OJ, for example, said, I didn't do it. And 12 jurors believed him, or at least believed there wasn't enough proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Oscar's always admitted it, right? He's always had to concede that he did it. So I'm not sure how much the blood evidence played into the judge's decision and how big it was at the trial, because he's admitting he did it. If he said that he didn't do it, and the blood trail, and blood tells a story. It can help you reconstruct what happened. So I think that it's a little bit unfair to Oscar, if you will, to compare the two, only because her throat wasn't slit.
Yeah. Well, I think we can take it a step further, and Nick, I'm sure, and I'll give you a chance to talk too, but the thing that Oscar said in his testimony was that well, first of all, we know he called his neighbor before he called emergency and asked them to come immediately. He carried her down the stairs, and he said in court, Oscar testified that Reeva died in his arms at the bottom of the stairs, and that he was desperately trying to get help for her. He was trying to get her out the front door because he was trying to drive her to the hospital.
He was also trying to resuscitate her. He was trying to give her mouth to mouth, and he even said he put his fingers in her mouth to open her airways.
Instruction, right? And there was no blood in there, right? She died very quickly. She wasn't. Right. So breathing in her.
So I just want to say this, that little block is an absolute that's manufactured, and that is, and you can say, one can sort of come afterwards and say, but so what? We know that she died. Why would it matter if he says he tried to save her? Why would it even matter? Well, the point is, if you go into the psychology of this guy, like beyond the immediate court case, and you look at many other instances, he's done exactly the same thing. He hasn't denied being involved, but he's denied being as seriously involved. In other words, he will take a given set of circumstances and sanitize them, cover them up, and embellish them. And and what he then does is he acknowledges something's his fault without actually fully acknowledging it.
That's his MO.
Which is a very manipulative way of lying.
Yeah, that's his MO. And that's what he was doing here too. So, I mean, I think that's what he was doing here too. He's like, I really messed up this time, and I've got no one else around me to take the blame, so I've got to make it as understandable as possible that I thought somebody was breaking in, and I didn't mean to kill her. I thought she was in bed, and it was dark and all. So I do agree with you that's, that does seem to be consistent with past behavior. Although I just don't know how much it hurts him if he was cleaning it up, perhaps because he's taking time to clean up, and when he should be just attending to her and getting help and whatever. But, I don't know how people think and how they act during these times, right? Thank God I've never been in a situation where I've had to cover my tracks, or I've hurt someone and I need to get them help, and I hope never to be in a situation like that. But I don't know how people think. Some react differently.
Best to address what you said there, I don't know how it hurts him. I want to sort of put up a mirror there and basically say, if we are wondering about premeditation, right, and none of us are gods, we can't sort of go and get like an eye in the sky back in time. But obviously this is speculative, but if you can join the dots and basically make a very strong case for post-meditation. So in other words, someone who's pretending that someone's still alive when they're not, someone who is cleaning someone's body up when and the comparison here is, if you had killed someone by mistake, someone that you love by mistake, you would be devastated. There would be no time for theatrics and drama. You would literally be broken. You know, you would just be, there would be no act, there would be no performance, you would just be whatever, you know. So all I'm trying to say is if you take that post meditation, wouldn't that line up perfectly with premeditation? You know, that this whole idea of, I'm just saying, isn't it more likely if there's post-meditation that there's premeditation, just as there was with Jodi Arias, just as there was with O.J. Simpson, you know, catching the flight and breaking the glass and, you know, everything carefully thought out.
Well, you know, you make an interesting argument. It's not a term, post-meditation, that I have seen used in any sort of legal context. We look at the behavior afterwards. We try to construct it. Sometimes there's behavior that is consistent with consciousness of guilt, and jurors will get an instruction on the consciousness of guilt because the person has fled or done something that that no reasonable person would do. But certainly everything is relevant. His behavior after, exactly what he did, and the timeline is relevant to either support or refute, you know, his position.
So, you know, Harringell actually decided in this trial to not use it. I mean, he basically, and he said this in court, that he was not going to contest anything that Oscar said after the point that he pulled Reeva out of the bathroom. I think that was a big mistake. I'm curious, based on what we're talking about, if you had this case, would you have included it?
Well, I can understand why he didn't, because it's really hard to measure how people are going to react. You know, everybody is different. I mean, there's only certain conduct, like the consciousness of guilt, if somebody's like getting in a car and just leaving the scene, you know, that no reasonable person, as I just mentioned, would do, or you can say, okay, that's bad. But it's really hard, I think, to argue that someone's reaction after the fact was not sincere, that it, you know, that they were faking it. It's hard to prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay, so you likely would have left it out then.
I understand, because you know, why complicate the case?
Yeah.
If you good case up until that point, he's admitting he did it, and now, you know, it's often the case when people admit that they've done something, but they can't admit to the crime itself, the elements of the crime. They'll admit what they can, they deny what they must. So Oscar Pistorius is admitting what he basically had to, but denying what he had to, right? He admitted he shot her, but he could not say exactly the way many people feel it now.
Yeah. What do you think?
But what frustrates me, I don't know about you, Lisa, but what frustrates, remember what we said before we went on this program was I originally studied law and I was very much into justice and so on, and you know, as someone very sincerely wanting to be a force for good, you know, like Superman in a suit kind of thing. But you know, I actually lost faith in the belief that was actually possible, just because I thought that the system is designed to make you abuse the loopholes kind of thing. And it's all about finding the loopholes. It's not about,
Oh, but Nick, you know what they say, evil triumphs when good men do nothing. You're needed in the justice system to help right the wrongs that you see. Don't walk away from it and feel that it's futile and you can't play a role. But as a journalist, you can play a role because you can expose it. I get frustrated with the justice system. I still think that what we have here in the United States is a good, solid system, but it is chock full of abuse and police abuse, overcharging, and also defense attorneys who can get up and say to the jury, and it's perfectly ethical, a lie, and you know, it stays with the jury, and their clients walk free, like Casey Anthony. But I do want to inject a case where we haven't talked about, only as an example here, and that is the overcharging of 6 police officers in Baltimore for the killing of unfortunate death of a man named Freddie Gray. These officers, in the course of their jobs, you know, they arrest someone, and Freddie Gray, and put him in the back of a police van, shackled and handcuffed, but not restrained by a seatbelt, and he gets a spinal cord injury that causes his death a week later in April of 2015. One officer went to trial, a jury was deadlocked, so he's going to be retried in the fall, I think. 2 more have gone to trial, and they've waived the jury. They're tried by a judge, like Oscar Pistorius was tried by a judge. And the judge acquitted them. The next one's up next Tuesday for another trial. These officers are overcharged, and I've begun to wonder about the justice system here in America. And jurors in a highly charged, very emotional case, are they really looking just at the evidence, or are they convicting someone based on emotion, which they're not supposed to do?
Yeah.
Because when that trial wasn't based on not guilty or guilty, it was based on what do we convict him of? We're not going to let the guy go, but which are the crimes?
Yeah. But I mean, if you look at O.J. Simpson, I mean, it's so weird. You sort of have the case itself. He gets acquitted based on payback for something else, and then he finally gets convicted based on payback for what he was acquitted from. And then so you sort of get this feeling of when does the justice system work? You know, I'm not saying these big cases are sort of examples of the entire justice system, but you know, Lisa and I have covered quite a few cases now, and you start getting kind of despondent because there are things that are so obvious. Something I want to sort of address with you, Beth, is what we've noticed as storytellers and as narrators, which the law system seems to miss in a way, and I can appreciate the fact that you know, courtrooms don't have unlimited time and they don't have unlimited resources to deal with everything. But the interesting thing with a narrative is that a narrative basically tries to get the whole of all the information, whether it's the deceased, the accused, you know, the whole process. And what we see time and time again are these patterns. We see patterns of behavior, we see psychological patterns which inform the accused before the murder. The way he behaves during the murder sort of lines up with that sort of behavior, and then afterwards as well. All lines up perfectly, and obviously when you're in a courtroom and you're only dealing with a little sort of microscopic thing, and you say, well, that's all we're going to deal with. In the same way that you make it easier in a way, you also cut your hands or tie your hands in terms of dealing with the.
I often say that a trial in the United States is a search for the truth, but only under the rules of evidence, because so much is kept out. And it's really much more complicated than that, because our system protects the rights of the accused so much that we will keep evidence out that is absolutely relevant and truthful if it's not gathered properly by the police, and no Miranda warnings are given, or it's seized without a search warrant when there was time to get a search warrant. So we exclude evidence. We have this exclusionary system, and to the detriment of the prosecution, to protect the rights of the individual. And you know, the foundation of our country is I mean, the bedrock is on the personal liberty and rights of individuals, and so we really bend over backwards to protect the guilty, to protect the accused, who are often guilty. Not all accused are guilty, but we would rather let a guilty man go free than convict an innocent person. So you're absolutely right, the point you're making, but we do have this exclusionary system. We balance rights, and that's just the way it shakes out. It is frustrating to many people, but in the end, you know, if you ever got falsely arrested, you'd want the system to work that way for you.
There's one thing I think that's an important question.
Crime scene photos. Like,
I was just going to ask that.
Would you put crime? Oh, okay.
I'm sorry. Well, I think this is important, and it goes to what we were talking about with the jury and emotions and how these cases get determined. So it's twofold. What do you think about crime scene photos being published? How do you personally deal with it with your own website? And what do you think about, you know, the media covering these cases, being in courtrooms? You know, so many people think that all of these things are a factor in how cases get decided. What do you think?
Well, I spent 19 years covering trials around the United States, and one trial outside. I was at one of the trials of a Bosnian Serb at the Hague, and that was televised as well. Not a blockbuster trial, but an important one. And so I am a proponent of cameras in the courtroom, because I have seen that it's important for people to see the justice system at work, to keep up their confidence in the system by watching it work. These courtrooms are public. People can go and sit in a courtroom, so why not just take it the next step and let it be televised? And I'm glad that the judge allowed the Pistorius trial to be televised, because these are our courts. This is our system. So I don't think it has a detrimental effect on cases either. Lawyers, as the general rule, love to perform, because you know what, trial lawyers take acting lessons often, you know, because you know it's theater. The courtroom is theater, and the jury is your audience. Some say the court of public opinion is the second audience, but okay, and perhaps it is. But I think that lawyers are going to act the way they act, whether or not a camera is there. I have talked to so many lawyers in cases I've covered who have said, after the first day or two, I didn't even realize the camera was there, because they're just so focused on their case. So I don't think the camera causes the stuff we see. I've seen a media circus outside a courtroom where there's no camera inside. Michael Skakel, the Kennedy nephew, who was tried in 2002 for a murder he committed when he was 15. That has been overturned, by the way, and he's facing a retrial maybe. He's out now. But there have been other cases. Michael Jackson's child molestation trial in Santa Maria, California. There was no camera there, and it was just zoo outside with Michael Jackson fans and media from around the world. So the camera in the courtroom, I don't think is a problem, and I think the public has a right to see their justice system at work.
What about the
So
evidence?
Nick
What
Cox
about the
is
pictures?
also involved in
Okay,
that
crime
case,
scene
so
photos.
Sorry,
that's
Nick.
the case.
Okay, you know, I do think that you know, the media will self-censor. It's okay to show these photos, right? But it is really an editorial decision made from one entity to the next, TV station, newspaper, whatever, what they're going to show. And on my site, I have most of the photos from the Jodi Arias trial, for example, but I didn't put the photo up of that big gaping wound of Travis Alexander's neck. Although it's okay, you know, I think it's okay if people do put it up. It does satisfy the prurient interest, voyeuristic interest in some people who like to look at graphic photos. I'm not sure why people really like to look at these gross photos, but I have a book on gunshot wounds, and there are some really gross. It's a textbook. There's some gross photos in there, but to understand, you know, like how you can self-inflict and blow your head off, you know, I needed to look at these photos. In any event, you know, I think people just need to, you know, publish according to what they're comfortable with. And you know, if it's something that you don't mind people seeing, okay. I draw some limits on my site.
Yeah. Nick, what do you think about that? What are you going to say?
Yeah, well, I think in this particular case, it's been all about Oscar in the same way that the O.J. Simpson case was sort of all about O.J. And but it was different in this case because you never really heard Reeva's side of the story. You never, her parents didn't really. Yeah.
Excellent point. Okay, and I do want to add something to that, because I have so many times spoken to the family members of murder victims after a trial saying, look, all we know about your child, your son, your daughter, is what happened on the autopsy table and what he or she looked like dead at the scene. Please tell us about your son, daughter in life. Who was she? And it gives them an opportunity. But at a trial, at least in the United States, you cannot talk about that kind of stuff. You cannot talk about the person in life unless it's relevant to, like, just before the crime or the relationship the two had, but not the wonderful person she was and all these things she aspired to do. That's for sentencing, either a sentencing phase, if there's a death penalty case, or the actual sentencing itself. Those are victim impact statements, and you give that later. But it's not relevant. It's going to prejudice the trier of fact to want to convict if you.
But that's also, I mean, isn't that also called character evidence, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's character evidence is often about the character of the defendant, right, and the reputation and character of the defendant. You'd be putting in just evidence about the victim, but it's not relevant in the crime itself. Generally, you know, what what she was like as a little girl and her modeling career and her legal career has nothing to do with what happened in the bathroom that day, unless their argument was, you're not ever going to practice law or model again, you're going to stay home and make babies for me or something like that, you know?
Well, look, what I think comes, again, this is more from a narrative perspective, I think, and the perspective of people watching the trial than the legal perspective, but you kind of get a sense also from the judge and even from the lawyers, you kind of get a sense where everything's hypothetical until you see sort of the crime scene photos. Everything's hypothetical and it's sort of whatever until, for example, when you saw Reeva's father testifying, you're seeing, right now I'm actually writing a chapter about Barry Steenkamp, and what's so crazy is this sort of mirror thing where you have a broken man, Oscar, and then you have a broken father. You have, this guy who is sort of just struggling to deal with his life, and then you have the father struggling, and you sort of compare which one is more authentic, and they don't see, it's like chalk and cheese, but the point being, you sort of almost, even though you've been dealing with this trial for weeks and years, it's almost like you suddenly realized again, wow, somebody actually died here. A person actually died.
Well, it brings it all back. And I have no doubt that both of them are broken men. I mean, God, if Oscar could turn the clock back, right? I mean, what his life has become and is going to be, I mean, he's done, right? And what he did in those few moments of losing his temper has destroyed his own life and has broken Reeva's father, and it's just so tragic. And this just is repeated over and over in murder cases. It's so senseless. It's so awful.
There's two things.
Beth, do you want to, if you look at the sorry, Lisa, if you look at the photos of Oscar at his bail hearing, this was in December 2015. They're photos of Oscar at his bail hearing, and you actually can't believe how different, that literally was 6 months ago. You can't believe how different Oscar looks. He's smiling.
Yes, he looked, of course I didn't see him in life the way you did, but he, his hair even looks like less, it looked unkempt. It just looked disheveled. He looked like he's not caring for himself as much. And, that's certainly, maybe it was orchestrated by his attorneys. Don't shave.
I think it is. I think it is because if you think of it in an extremely shallow way, you think, well, you want bail, don't you? So it's no big deal you're getting bail. Let's smile, and the judge isn't going to really worry because you're a nice guy. It's not, in other words, it's sort of the benefit of the doubt, smiling kind of thing, right? If you compare that, you juxtapose that to now sentencing time. Now you are going to be sentenced. There's no doubt about that. But you can mitigate that by seeming like you're already suffering. You're not. We definitely don't want you smiling now. So we want you suffering at the maximum because someone's going to say, "Well, you're already suffering. We don't really want you suffering more than you have to."
Let me ask you a question, Nick. Let me ask you a question. That bail hearing, was that before the appellate court convicted him of murder? After. Okay. So
at that stage, Oscar knows I'm a convicted murderer waiting sentence, but now I want bail. This was in December 2015.
Because the judge has discretion to mitigate down from the mandatory 15-year minimum, and so maybe it's part of an act. Yeah. Because what else does the judge knows all the evidence. So, she knows it all. She already gave him a 5-year sentence. There's no, he had to do something to have an argument that he should get less than 15. And what else could he do? So now you're making me think it might not be so sincere.
Well, so I think I want to finish off with a couple of questions, and we've kept you for quite a while. So I just want to kind of wrap it up with a few things that I want to get your opinion on. So first of all, I want to know your opinion on Oscar's psychology. Is he a narcissist? Is he a sociopath, a psychopath? I want to know what you think about him.
Well, I'm no expert, Lisa. I would say at a minimum he's a narcissist, but I don't know if he's a psychopath or a sociopath. I don't know. I just, he was a little too trigger happy for me. He liked his guns too much. And, he was compensating for, I think, being a big man for his disability. And he came so far in life, and kudos to him for competing with able-bodied men. I just wish he had a different personality. But at a minimum, I think he's a narcissist, but I can't say beyond that.
Okay.
So, Lisa, just to touch on that, Beth, which sort of high-profile murderer would you compare Oscar to? Like, who would he be kind of a match to, somewhere else?
A high-profile murder, because it would have to be a self-defense, saying I didn't mean to kill her. I'm thinking. Because you did a good job in comparing him to OJ in that they were athletes and they killed lovers.
What about
OJ did say in some of his domestic violence things. He said that Nicole hit him. That was definitely.
You know who I'm thinking of, Beth, is Phil Spector. Now it wasn't self-defense, but he was a gun-happy dude. And he kind of tried to pawn it off on, you know what I mean, like put it on her instead of himself.
She killed herself. I mean, there are some parallels there. Yes, he had met her that day and brought her home with him. They had some sexual contact, but they didn't have sex. They kissed, and he tried to say she did it herself. I didn't. He was trigger happy. He had pulled guns on lots of people and held them to heads of women, over the years. And locking them in his house. So there are some parallels there, some parallels to OJ.
What sentence did he end up with? Do you remember?
He got 19 to life sentence. He got second-degree murder convicted.
Okay.
And it was that depraved heart theory.
So along those lines, I mean, I think there are some interesting comparisons there. So Oscar now has a conviction of what we would consider second-degree murder. And, the judge has to decide if there are mitigating factors. Without going into all of them, really the two primary ones that the defense brought up was Oscar's disability, and of course they had him walk without his legs through the courtroom. And the other mitigating factor that they talked about was the fact that what Nick had kind of talked about, that he didn't mean to kill Reeva, that it was just a nondescript person, which for me, that's wildly offensive to say that, just because it wasn't Reeva, that person's life doesn't matter. That's really what they used. So in that context, if you're the judge, how much time do you give Oscar Pistorius?
Well, I mean, the law says it's a minimum of 15 years. So if she's leaning toward mitigation, and I would think she might, because she gave him that culpable homicide conviction with 5 years, I would say he gets at least 10. If she's leaning toward mitigation, I would say 10 or more.
Does that disability warrant any mitigation?
Well, I had two disabled brothers, a different kind of disability, and they died. And so, it's hard. It's really hard for me not to feel, something, and compassion for people who aren't able-bodied.
Sure.
But he certainly was a very gifted athlete who overcame so much. And I don't know that he should be necessarily given a break for that. But I don't know how prisons will treat him. Can he wear his legs in prison, or does he have to be on his stumps? And if so, I might cut some years off. If he has to keep them off, I might cut some years off.
Yeah. Well, I kind of made not a very politically correct remark, but I thought it was at least authentic to what I was feeling. But the psychologist was saying, if he could have his way, he would have Oscar hospitalized immediately. And so I said, well, have him put exactly where he was, in the hospital wing of the jail, then you hit two birds with one stone.
Well, that whole thing about, I mean, that's a big part. That's a big problem with the defense's argument too. Is they're arguing that he was so unwell he couldn't testify at his own sentencing hearing. That he literally is so out of it. He's given up on life and really should be hospitalized. But then on the flip side of it, they're saying, and he said this in his interview, and this is a problem with interviewing before you're sentenced. He said, he wants to go on, he wants to help other people, he doesn't want to waste his life, he wants to be educated. They're two totally different arguments.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yes, they do seem to be contrary. And I cannot believe he did that interview and that it aired before his sentencing. I mean, I can believe he did the interview, but maybe once he was in prison, he would not have been able. So he certainly couldn't have done it in his uncle's house, right? So for them to get the interview, they had to do it in advance of his sentencing, but he could have made an agreement with ITV. Well, he could have asked, don't air it till after my sentencing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they would have agreed to that. Maybe he did ask that. But
I think he did. I think the original, Lisa, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the original schedule for the trial was that it would run until that Friday, and sentencing would be actually on that Friday, and then I think they adjourned. It was sort of adjourned for a later period, and I think by then the ITV thing had been fully established, and they couldn't get out of it, But what I also think was really interesting, I'm not sure if you caught this, Beth, in the interview. Oscar says something like, I'm prepared to spend 10 years in jail if that's what it takes. I'll do the maximum for culpable homicide, but I'm not prepared to spend 1 day in jail for murder. But nevertheless saying, I'm prepared to spend 10 years. If the judge is listening to that, she must be saying, okay, well, that's it.
That's true. And I said 10 years. I am aware that I read that. When he gave this interview, though, he had already been convicted by the appellate court of murder, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why he made that comment, but whatever.
Because he will refuse, absolutely refuse, even though that's his verdict, to accept it. And yet his expert on the stand says he accepts it. So that's a massive problem I have with Oscar, is he is constantly contradicting himself between his own statements, his family's statements, and his lawyer's statements.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting.
Yeah.
So do you think the sentencing is really going to happen on July 6th?
I do. Yeah, I think this is it. Yeah.
And under South African law, will he go in that day, or will he be sentenced and then given a couple of weeks to get his life in order?
No, I think it will be from the court, the way it happened previously as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
interesting.
We'll find out in a week.
It's different in America where like with the Supreme Court of Appeal, where he got convicted, then he got bail. That wouldn't happen in the States, would it?
Or you got convicted and then got bail. Sometimes you can get bail, but generally not. Sometimes if you say, well, I got an appeal here, you're not awaiting sentence, but you have an appeal, and you make the argument and lay out some facts that you have a good chance of prevailing on appeal. But it depends. I mean, I've seen people get convicted and they're allowed out between the conviction and sentencing, but that's usually on white-collar crimes. Often with murder cases, there's no discretion for the judge. That person goes in to jail as soon as they're convicted, and jail is where you're held pre-trial, or you go when you're sentenced to misdemeanors. Prison is where you go when you're sentenced on felonies. So
because remember, after the Supreme Court of Appeal convicted him, he then tried to appeal that with the highest court in South Africa, which is the Constitutional Court, and they then turned him down. Now, that's kind of what a lot of people were saying, is you've now had your appeal turned down. Now, shouldn't you be in jail pending whatever happens after that? Why on earth, even a sentencing hearing, why on earth should you not be in jail then? But then people said, well, he is under house arrest. So
I mean, we don't have the system you have, so he wouldn't on appeal been convicted of murder in the United States. But if he had been convicted of murder at trial, he would never be out. Yeah. He would never be out. He'd be in. So, I mean, but look, good lawyering. He's a famous person. He has good ties to the community. Everybody knows who he is. It's not like he can escape easily. He's got this disability that does hinder his ability to, well, I shouldn't say it hinders, he can run pretty fast. He can run pretty well. But,
we were surprised he didn't go on the run.
Freedom.
We were surprised that Oscar didn't like Jodi Arias, like OJ, try and even like Amanda Knox try and sort of make a run for it, you know. But something I want to ask you, probably one of our last questions, Lisa, is something Reeva's father mentioned. You probably have a better handle on this as someone who was a lawyer for as long as you were. Reeva's plan was she studied law, she got a degree, she evidently did quite well, but then she wanted to follow her dream, and so her plan was to have a modeling career and take that as far as she could, and then her plan was to sort of once that, I don't want to say that ship had sailed, but once she'd taken that as far as she wanted to take it, or as far as she could take it, she would then kind of jump back into law and then carry on with that. The impression I got from studying Reeva's own narrative was actually that even though that was the plan, when she did try, I don't know how many people are aware of this, but when she did actually try to, because there was a period where she was really struggling with the modeling, I think around about, not exactly sure of the date, but it was about 2010, 2011. She actually made an attempt to start a law career, and people kind of said to her, well, where have you been? What have you been doing in terms of law for the past 5 years? And she didn't really have an answer. So as a result, she then went back into modeling. And the impression I got from that, which is you can't actually do that. You can't study law and then come back after 10 years and or whatever it is and just jump back in. What do you say to that?
I say that's a bunch of hogwash. I mean, I've been away from law for years, and that's one of the options that I've considered is going back. And I've talked to the bar, and they're like, "Sure, you can practice tomorrow."
Okay, but
I think
if you've not
that she got a law degree, and just because she wasn't practicing much and then wanted to get into it 5 years later, that what have you been doing? But she was doing stuff. She was just doing something different from law. So I don't think that it should have been held against her.
But isn't it a case of, look, in your case, you've got a portfolio behind you. In her case, she all she really had was her studies behind her. She hadn't taken on any cases. She didn't really have a, what do they call it?
Right, she had to start from the bottom, though. So, okay, so she's being challenged, like, well, you got this law degree and then you didn't use it. And I don't know, maybe she needed to earn some money, and modeling can pay well, and maybe she needed to pay off school. I mean, I don't know what her situation was, but I feel bad for her if she was criticized for not pursuing law initially. You know, she wanted to use a great physical asset of hers, her body, her looks, her beautiful face, make a little money at it. Why not? You know, before she got older and would be less marketable.
Mm-hmm. That might be a difference between South Africa and America, though, Nick. You know what I mean? Like, that might be a difference in your country than here, where if somebody had that separation in time, there's more of an opportunity here to get back into it than there is there.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Beth, are you going to go back into law?
What's that?
Is this breaking news? You're going back into law?
No. It is something I've considered. No, I've got a lot of little projects going, but no, it is. You know, I talk to my friends-in-law all the time, and some of them are like, just do PR for lawyers. You know, why bother going into the practice? They're all looking to. Well, some of them are happy practicing, but after a couple of decades, they're like, I want to change. You know, so.
Sure. That's a tough
the grass is always greener. I think I want to do what they're doing now. They want to do what I'm doing. So.
That's always the way.
Whatever. Yeah.
Well, if you guys
anyway, it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. No, I really appreciate your time. It's always fun talking. You and I met through the Jodi Arias trial, and that was a lot of fun to talk about. I look forward to talking about more cases with you in the future. So if anybody out there has not checked out Beth's site, you definitely need to. It's karasoncrime.com. She's also on social media. You're on Twitter, @Beth Karas, right, is your Twitter handle? Yeah. Anywhere else they can see you?
I now have @KarasOnCrime. But I often will just retweet what one post or retweet on the other. So either one.
Good deal. Okay. Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And
thanks
you know
to both of you.
Thanks, Beth.
Nick is going to be at the court on July 6th, so we'll give you some updates from what he's seeing and hearing there.
Great. Right. Good luck, Nick.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay,
Keep in
bye-bye.
touch.
Bye.
Bye.